Hi. Jay Foreman recently released a new episode of his brilliant Unfinished London series about the 32 borough councils of London. It's brilliantly informative and entertaining. You should watch it. However, his thumbnail did ask the question, worst logo? And this was never quite addressed. So, in this video, as a graphic designer specializing in branding and lettering, I want to completely over-deliver on that premise by meticulously and bitchily critiquing every one of London's 32 borough logos, as well as ranking them scientifically from best to worst. So this video is not about who has the best looking logo. I mean, that is subjective. What looks best to me is not necessarily what looks best to you. It's a matter of taste. So I will be giving each logo a score based on more measurable, if still not scientific criteria. But I'll begin by breaking down how that system works. And then we'll be looking at the quirks and features of this set of logos as a whole, before breaking down each one individually from best to worst, and finally be answering some of the how and why. Some basic context for those who've not watched Jay's video: London has been broken down into 32 administrative areas or boroughs, as well as a special area called the City of London, which is like a borough but not, and also is not London the city. It's very confusingly named. The City of London, kind of like the District of Columbia, as in Washington, D.C., how DC is not a state but kind of functions like a state. Think of that City of London as kind of not a borough, but it kind of works like a borough. So we'll touch on that also in this video, making a total of 33 different logos. So each of these logos we will break down across 5 different aspects of their design: suitability, ownability, longevity, typography, and execution, or SALTY, if you will, patent not pending. First, suitability. This is how fit these logos are for their given purpose. Even great logos can be unsuitable for certain contexts. For example, Apple has a great logo, but it would be unsuitable for a butcher shop or a professional sports team. So in this specific case, a logo for a council should give some reflection of the area and its heritage perhaps, as well as convey the authority of a government entity. Second, ownability is how distinctive a logo is, both generally as well as specifically amongst other organizations within that field or domain. For example, the British Royal Air Force and Target, the retailer, both have similar logos but have such distinctly different domains, you're not likely to confuse one with the other. So that would not affect ownability of that logo. However, Bentley and Aston Martin both have very similar logos within the same domain and same market segment in that domain, so that would affect their ownability over that logo. I would also say that a logo has low ownability if it's just kind of generic and not very interesting, but we'll get to that soon enough. Longevity is how well a logo has aged or will age, like fine wine or like milk. Of course, it's more subjective when it comes to projecting into the future, but it's still an important criteria to consider. Typography, fairly straightforward. We look at what fonts have been selected and how they've been used. Lastly, execution covers the craft and care or lack thereof given to the details, as well as the overall balance of the logo. Is it well constructed? Does it scale well at different usage sizes? Is it awkward and difficult, or is it easy and flexible to use? Each of these 5 SALTY attributes will be given a score from 1, very bad, to 5, very good, and tallied for a total score, minus deductions for completely arbitrary personal reasons. But before we get to the ranking, let's take a look at the playing field. Here we go. Here are the contenders. Now, it is a motley crew to be sure, but we can definitely see a couple of trends. First of all, on the typography, out of all 33 logos, about a full third rely on one of 3 typefaces: Helvetica Neue or Helvetica New, depending how German you're feeling, Gill Sans, or Frutiger. Helvetica, for all its ubiquity and many shortcomings, it does have flexibility on its side, and we can see that we have a few different weights in use, as well as the expanded or extended version. Gill Sands makes a lot of sense given that these are British government entities, and Eric Gill, after all, was one of the most influential British type designers of the 20th century, even though he was notably a horrible human being. But still, his work persists to this day, and Frutiger, which is the font of choice for international airport signage. It really doesn't speak to any particular place, pretty timeless, it is very well crafted and very legible, so perfectly suitable for this usage. Now I get to play a little game called Whose Crest is Best? We have got in front of us 7 different boroughs, as well as the City of London's heraldic shield-based logos. Now, when the boroughs were divided into their current 32-group configuration, a lot of them, in 1965, chose to stick with a traditional heraldic crest. And out of this group, undoubtedly, Islington has got the cleanest, most modern interpretation of that idea. I mean, look at that crisp vector artwork, not a detail out of place except for this tiny hanging orphan that drives me slightly insane the more I look at it, which no one will ever see in 99.99% of its applications. That is very well done. Second place has to go to the City of London. Of course, with all the money, because they have all the banks and financial institutions, I would expect no less. But they have done a pretty good job overall of modernizing and simplifying the form of their traditional heraldic shield. I'm not as big a fan of these sausage-shaped brush strokes here throughout, but that's an issue of personal taste, and overall it's executed very well. Second place runner-up has to be Hounslow here, with its very clean artwork, although it definitely wins the category of most likely to be mistaken for Harry Potter merchandise. With these 2 griffins here, as well as this very cute dog that is holding a trumpet somehow in the crook of its arm, which I just find adorable. That covers the best. Let's talk about the worst. As a former resident of Westminster Council, may I say that I am completely underwhelmed by this blotchy, auto-traced vectorization of what appears to be a scan of a low-res postage stamp. I mean, what on earth is this shape right here? Is it a ketchup stain? I cannot tell. It's baffling and it's terrible and it makes me want to cry. And equally making me want to cry for completely opposite reasons is this from Bexley. Look at the number of different stroke widths on this monstrosity, as well as the unnecessary amount of detail. I mean, this tree seems to be sprouting men's sandals of some kind. There's so many details that are so wrong. The gradients, everything. It's not good. Let's leave it at that. Enough ranting. Onto the ranking. Let's look at all of these logos in depth, starting with the best, working our way down to the worst. So in joint first place for best logo, we have Lambeth Council. The score for suitability is only middling. It's not unsuitable and it's not particularly suitable in that this could be a logo for accounting or other professional services, something like that, equally plausible, but not the wrong solution. A very good solution, actually. It's very ownable in that it is differentiated from the other logos in this group. The longevity, I think it has quite good longevity. This was done 2000, 2001, sometime like that. And the typography is the only part that gives away the age a little bit. This is custom, bespoke lettering, I believe, likely inspired by Font Dax, which was made in 1995. It's a very distinctive design in that the shoulders of the M and N characters go straight out from the stem. And you can see the same feature here. It doesn't have the exact same proportions as Dax, but it doesn't look too dated. And it's overall executed very well. This mark can be shrunk down at very small pixel sizes and blown up and still look great. Yep, just solid work overall. High scoring for a reason. In joint first place, we have, of course, Islington. We talked about before how sharp that crest looks, and the typography also really well done. It's just Gill Sans, but tracked elegantly, a little extra letter spacing in that all cap layout, and just very confident and self-assured. It does lose some ownability in that this group has many iterations on this idea. but Islington executes it possibly at the best level out of all of them. And last but not least, for top position is Hackney with its patented dumbbell or a pneumatic press silhouette logo. But yeah, very, very simple design, but quite timeless, at least as far as the mark goes. This was introduced in 1965 from the beginning. And still to this day, very ownable. In fact, legally, they took, I believe, Nike to court and they won. So it shows that they really do own this. And simplicity is oftentimes the best. It's very well executed, tightly tracked Helvetica black, looking slightly retro now, but maybe that's a positive depending who you are. So typography and suitability, this could be a logo for many things. That's how it works when you go ultra simple, but hard to fault the logo of Hackney Council. Tied for runner-up, we have got the City of London itself. Of course, it probably would have ranked amongst the top, but I arbitrarily chose to give it a 1-point deduction for being full of insufferable bankers and having all the money to spend on branding. So they are at an unfair advantage there. Speaking of having all the money, the typographic solution seems to be bespoke. Yeah, I have to give them points for executing very, very well. And there is no mistaking what this logo is for. That's why the suitability score tops out. You can't mistake this for being the logo for a bank or any kind of other professional service, really. It is a government logo and it is executed quite well. So tying with the City of London in score, we have the Borough of Hounslow and their simple logo with crest locker, that neutral typeface, Frutiger, hard to fault, and we've talked about the crest could be slightly simpler, but very well done overall. Next we have Tower Hamlets, and they have got quite a distinctive mark in this set. They are also the only ones to use Futura, quite a timeless choice. The line work could be slightly cleaner. There's a little bit of zigzagging at different angles. Probably until this moment, nobody else has bothered to notice that. Brent Council comes in strong with their Rainbow Bagel offering. It is definitely ownable. It gets top marks for that. This was executed by an in-house team, I believe, and so the execution, while very good, could definitely be simpler. The amount of gradients going on could give some people seizures, but even when it's reduced down to black and white, the shape itself is very distinctive, and overall quite good results. Camden, one of the original logo marks from back in 1965. Again, many people baffled by this set of 8 hands. It does predate a SIM card, so I can't hold that against them entirely. Points for ownability, although longevity, I can't say that the changes to their typography over time have been for the better. So not to get too bitchy, but we are starting to get towards the middle of the deck, which means that the results we are seeing now are neither brilliant nor terrible. So I'm going to give you very loose thoughts quickly as I shuffle through these before we get to the stuff that is noteworthy for infamous reasons. City of Westminster. We've talked about their crest being scanned horribly. The typeface is Garamond condensed or narrow, which reminds me of Apple in the 90s. It hasn't aged the greatest. The lockup's not great, and it's not terrible. It definitely does what it says on the tin. Hammersmith and Fulham have got their river in a ribbon device going here. It's a little awkwardly balanced, but the type is quite nice overall. It seems to be a bespoke solution based perhaps on Joanna Sands or a cut there of an Eric Gill inspired typeface. Greenwich get a few points docked for this swoosh. Also notable that they've mixed Gill Sans with Microsoft's classic Georgia, which you might remember from Microsoft Word. But the rose itself is quite nice. I'm not sure why it is so recessive in the design and this swoosh. Have I got a bias against swooshes? Yes. Do I have reasons? Let's not go into it. The video is getting long. Obvious metaphor for community. Not sure it's executed at the highest level. Nice to see them using a local London produced type foundry. They do get points for ownability. Nobody else has got a logo like Haringey for better or worse. The name being spelled entirely in red tape. Not a great association for a government body. The typography, apart from this construction here, is in Effra, which is named after a river of London by Dalton Marg, which is very nice and has been executed very well. The longer you stare at Kingston's logo, the more unnecessary detail you can find. Optima, as a type choice, hasn't aged all that well, considering that it has almost no straight lines in its design. Therefore, on screen, always renders slightly strange. Speaking of aging poorly, they get a deducted point for this gem on their brand and style guide, which looks like the ice sculpture a Bond villain would carve. But more egregiously, they have a tone of voice writing style guide, which includes the instruction to refer to people as dual heritage, not mixed race would be fine, or half caste. Hopefully your brand style guide isn't the place where you learn not to use ethnic slurs. But then again, this does date all the way back to September 2015. This is the most current version of Redbridge's council logo, which is a silhouette of a photograph. They had adopted the hot trend back in the early 2000s of photographic logos. That didn't stick around for a reason. Bexley, we've already roasted their crest quite adequately, but the typography is a little interesting. It's a different typeface than we've seen before. It's Adobe Shannon. I'm not sure about setting it all caps and having it so tightly tracked in terms of legibility. Looking at Kensington and Chelsea's logo, you would not know that they are one of the richest, poshest areas of London. I mean, someone has attempted to simplify and modernize this crest, and they have failed spectacularly. The negative space is very odd. The stroke widths are not managed well. They've got this winged cow looking up at this baguette growing a mohawk. It's an oddity. Havering is an odd duck. This type is called Linotype Noah. It is designed by a Danish type designer back in the 90s to work on CRT TVs and to work within those technological constraints. It's just the wrong application for this typeface. If this had been also set in Helvetica or Gill Sans, it would be more generic, but it would have been better executed. Barnett's logo is inoffensive. It's also low effort. Jay Foreman described this as a rip-off of the BBC, but the BBC have got 3 evenly sized squares, and Barnett have got these series of slightly awkwardly different sized rectangles. I can see what they were going for, but they've had 3 iterations of this logo design, and it somehow gets worse every time. And I have to say, this particular version looks like something that a middle schooler would draw on the condensation inside a bus window. The awkwardness of the letter forms, the K, the W, it lacks all of the dynamism and energy of genuine handwriting or lettering, but has so much wrong with it. That, and you could replace the word council with just about anything. Dentist, playhouse. I'm not sure if this qualifies as a logo. And it's not a bad typeface. It's kind of nice to see something slightly different from standard Gill Sans. And purple's a fine color, but there's not a lot to say about what little is going on here. Bromley, the London borough. I suppose a clarification is needed because if you don't have that, you assume that it's Bromley, the paint shop or DIY specialists. Why choose this version of a hand-rendered art? It looks like Biomley with a missing dot. Waltham Forest has aged like milk, but I can see the potential for a fine cheese in it. It is so close to being retro cool, but this horrible typography. There's nothing wrong with Rockwell as a font, but tracking it out like this, it's so strange, and the overall balance of this composition is so unwieldy. But I do really like this kind of mixture of thin and thick strokes and this the shape of this tree that reminds me of the Union Jack. I think there's some potential for a really cool retro thing going on, untapped potential. Looks like a golf course or budget hotel. Way too much detail in this crest. I mean, you can see like little divots on the knight's helmet. This would be a great illustration for some kind of Knights Templar themed comic book full page spread, but this is meant to be something that's reproduced, you know, at the size of a postage stamp, clearly, and it's not been thought through at all. The typography, again, strange choices going on. We've got the movie poster font Trajan with this oddly customized H, and London set in a typeface reminiscent of the default font of Mac OS version 1.0. A strange pairing. I mean, this illustration belongs on the front of a children's book. It's about the giving tree needs a haircut. Speaking of awkward trees, Sutton seems to have some kind of diseased lettuce. This is meant to be an apple tree. I can only imagine the agony as generations of graphic designers have tried to make this work in a balanced layout somehow. Here we have Merton, your used IT specialist. This is so much of a throwback, it's almost vaporwave, but it's so badly done. I think that's the thing. I mean, you can't really fault Helvetica on its own, but this 3D water wheel looks like it was made with a pirate copy of AutoCAD in 1993, and there's not much rescuing that. It has to be really rethought. Enfield look like they'll be moving into peddling some kind of motor oil soon. They have the infamous claim of being the only ones to use Arial in their design, not Helvetica. You can tell the difference because Arial has no true italics, so when it's slanted like this, the letter forms get distorted, especially at the shoulder of the N's and the U's, which are both in the word council. Poorly constructed and very forgettable. Richmond may have some of the worst typography I have seen in a logo, full stop. I mean, if you have such a long and unwieldy name, why would you set it all in caps in italic at the same size? London has the same weight as Richmond, and one of those two pieces of information is more important than the other. So terrible job on the typography. But the logo has got the bones of something retro and interesting with this stylized R, but it is distracted by this strange green element at an angle, the weird negative space. They also get a bonus deduction for being too ashamed of their own logo to use it in their website masthead. Wandsworth have a decent bumper sticker on their hands and a terrible logo, especially when you take into account this awkward holding shape. A skyline is making a particular choice, and unless you have a very iconic skyline, it's going to be very reminiscent of a bunch of very local small businesses. This logo I could see for a bookshop. Finally, we're at the bottom three, the worst three logos. Now, technically these all scored the same, except that two of them got deductions to reach that score. So I'm saving the one that got the clean lowest score till last. Starting with Barking and Dagenham, with perhaps one of the most generic logos I've seen. It looks like they bought some off-brand logo design software and just used the default template. These swooshes could not be more meaningless, and the tight tracking on the Helvetica is not doing them any favors, particularly at how small London Borough of. You should track out letters at small sizes, not squish them closer together. Needless to say, they were too ashamed of their handiwork to showcase it on their homepage. Harrow Council have the notable honour of being the only ones to make me laugh out loud upon seeing their logo for the first time. Harrow, along with Enfield, they also get to claim the infamy of being constructed purely from type that you found bundled with Microsoft Word 2003. So the handwritten aspect of this logo is a font called Freestyle Script, which has had its R's modified for some undiscernible reason, and its W is kind of pushing its little pinky through and doing strange things to its neighbor, which is quite a respectable font, strangely. Eurostyle or Eurostyle that you probably have seen in almost every sci-fi film ever, including 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's just been very clumsily used here, and the overall effect is definitely not one of sci-fi or futurism. This very awkward pill-shaped, containing shape, the overall effect can only be described as comic. And that's not what you want from a government authority. Again, on their website, only at the very bottom, they've hidden it, so they know what they did. Which leads me finally to the very worst logo of all of London's 32 boroughs. Newham, with this piece of nothing. It's like a parody of a logo. It has the swoosh, it has the typeface that is so nothing that it's not even Arial? Is everything all right, Newham? Have you got nothing to say? I've seen placeholder images with more to say than this logo. But I think that's really the tragedy of this logo. It says that Newham is a nothing place with nothing notable about it. And that can't really be true, because London is an interesting place with interesting people. I'm sure there are stories, a heritage to draw from, a lot of things that could be here instead of this. Say what you like about Harrow's logo, and I've said a few things just now, but at least it made me laugh. This one just makes me sad. So that leaves the question of why. Why are so many council logos mediocre or bad? Firstly, because councils are under pressure to spend as little money as possible on branding. People are totally within their rights to scrutinise how their tax money is spent. But inevitably, when a council tries to do a new logo or rebrand, you see the same news articles and opinion pieces come out that say they spent XDX £1,000 and they ended up with a logo that a child could have drawn. If you don't pay for professional work, don't expect it to be professional grade. Secondly, even without budgets entering into the picture, you have the issue of stakeholder engagement. And in these municipal governments, you have all of these constituents with varying views for what they want to see. A lot of them will prefer the status quo no matter how bad the previous thing was, just because it's familiar. So that's an uphill battle in its own right. And lastly, you have the problem of storytelling. Now, there's a reason why major corporations spend millions of pounds and millions of dollars on rebranding campaigns. A lot of the perceived value of a logo or a brand comes from storytelling. These aren't just some squiggly lines on a logo. These represent the proud maritime heritage of this area and celebrate its people, blah, blah. While that might seem trite, it is true that the stories that we tell about these marks are more important sometimes than the marks themselves. The best logo in the world isn't going to change public perception. Your feelings about your council's logo are way more likely to be influenced by how you feel about the council already than your feelings about a logo changing how you feel about the council. So that's why the best time for any organization to change its logo or rebrand is when that becomes a visual indicator of a management shift or organizational change. People are much more receptive to a new logo when there becomes a visual marker of something new happening, rather than feeling it's a piece of marketing trickery. New logo, same old business as usual. So that about wraps up all my thoughts about London's council's logo. Quite exhaustive. What do you think about the ranking? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Like or dislike this video, because feeding the algorithm engagement is what it wants. It will get more people to see my videos, and I really appreciate that. If you want to leave me a comment, let me know which was your favorite and which was your worst logo of the batch. Also, let me know if you'd like to see a future video breaking down a kind of logo shootout for another industry or perhaps another country. I'd possibly be open to doing that depending how much work it turns out to be. I'd also love to do another video about the previous former logos of some of these councils, looking back at some of the good, bad and ugly of the past. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested to see. My name's Linus and I've been ranting for far too long about logos. I'll be back in future with more design videos. Thank you for watching all the way to the end.